Now let's bring in George Tillis, senior markets correspondent. George, I wanted to get your take here on Intel. You know, it's had some pretty decent gains. It seems like, you know, nobody really respects Intel, but at the same time, it's had nice gains this year. It's, you know, way behind the leaders in the space in Nvidia and AMD. What's your take here? Is this move higher kind of warranted? Or are they just getting dragged by their coattails because the other names are doing so well?
Well, I think it's part of that latter comment there, Tom. I think that Intel is moving higher alongside the other chip manufacturers. We know that Nvidia is the leader in GPU chips, and AMD is also a competitor with Intel or against Intel in the CPU markets. But we know AMD also is a GPU marketplace, but also the industrial end markets, and of course field programmable markets when they bought Xilinx. But I think Intel looks interesting. I mean, if you just look at the chart on a weekly basis, it's been trending just really steadily over the past year to the upside, both above its respective 10 and 20-week moving averages. And if you look at the financials for Intel, they actually look very poor on a trailing basis. If you consider just an earnings, looking at when they're going to be announcing on the 26th, their earnings are expected to be profit of 22 cents on an adjusted basis, but that's significantly lower than last year's 59 cents for the same quarter. So they are expected to show decelerating earnings, but also sales at around $13.5 billion, about $2 billion less than the $15.4 billion from last year. So that's about a 16% decrease in sales. But again, looking forward, it looks very interesting for Intel because their earnings estimates are rising, and sales growth for the next 4 quarters are expected to be down where they were previous years, but in the low single digits versus the mid-teens in which they're going to be reporting this time around. I think this is an interesting situation for a company that may be in the midst of a turnaround. I think if you look at some of the businesses that Intel is in, obviously the CPU market is their biggest market share with about 80% of the total market share and 20% coming from AMD. I think the server markets, data center markets are other areas where Intel is growing based upon enterprise demand. But there's another market that I found that Intel is actually in. They actually produce semiconductors that are utilized in optical equipment that is used for broadband and communication networks. If you think about the hyperscale needs for artificial intelligence and high-scale data transfers, Intel is actually one of the largest 10 most companies in the world that produces these particular semiconductors that are used in optical equipment. So I think that's a catalyst for Intel going forward. And I think also quickly here that we're probably going through a cycle where there's going to be demand for CPUs and computers, at least from the consumer side and perhaps the enterprise side, because we haven't seen effectively a recycle or a cycle refresh for demand for computers like laptops and, of course, desktops really since the pandemic. And I think we're due for that cycle turnaround here.
George, you touched on exactly what my question was going to be. 8 consecutive quarters of declining PC shipments, down 9% last quarter, year over year. Is a replacement cycle, is a PC crash and a recovery in PCs. But the question is that enough for Intel? Will that put them back on the map, George? They're making improvements. They're doing all the right things, but they need this business cycle to turn around. Am I correct?
They do, and I think that's a good point to bring up because, I mean, looking at the chart, I mean, it's very volatile if you just look at it on a daily basis. But if you strip out some of the volatility of the weekly charts, you're seeing higher highs and higher lows. So I think that's telling. You know, it's tough to say whether we're going to get a turnaround, you know, soon. I suggest we're probably going to see some sort of turnaround in 2024. Some analysts see it on the back half of 24. Some see it, you know, coming up in Q2 of 2024. But the price is moving first. So I think that's very telling here because Intel really relies on end markets for computers. But at the same time, I think their movement into the industrial automation markets is also another catalyst for this company. So, you know, the multiple is probably expanding because of its peers moving to the upside. But at the same time, when you look at the profile of earnings estimates going forward in the next 4 quarters, the trajectory is higher. So I think that's also very telling, considering the stock is moving first. Earnings estimates are catching up, also moving higher. And again, we may be witnessing or seeing the beginnings of a CPU turnaround because of demand for NPCs, and of course the server market, which again is another component of their the CPUs.
Yeah, and we can't forget that they just recently announced that its intent to separate that PSG group operations from the overall company, but definitely lagging. But market likes it this year, up 37%. All right, thanks to George Tillis,
Yep.
senior markets correspondent here on the network, breaking down Intel.